Fox Weather is your Hurricane HQ, so let's talk tropics. Colorado State University dialed back its 2025 hurricane forecast. The outlook nudged down just slightly. This was a little tweak in their latest update. That was a couple weeks back. The team of prominent tropical experts over at CSU citing a more hostile than advertised atmosphere in the Caribbean in that update. Let's show you some of the updated numbers there. And I said this was a little nudge, barely an update, down just slightly with, I don't even want to call it a slow start to the season, because by name storms, we're actually still ahead of schedule. Average first hurricane, we don't typically see that in the Atlantic Basin until the second week of August. It's just when you have a slightly above average forecast, if you don't get some of those more throwaway, sloppy, homegrown storms, the overall numbers in the season overall can come down. But that doesn't always tell us a lot about the most significant or consequential storms. Let's dig into all this. We've got the scientist who leads the team behind that forecast, one of the top tropical minds in our country, Dr. Phil Klotzbach, joining us now. Phil, great to see you again. Awesome to have you back on Fox Weather. Kind of wanted to get a bit of a report card so far. 3 named storms so far this season, no hurricanes, as I said. That's not unusual at this point in the season. What's been interesting to you so far about this season? Anything that you've noticed new since the last update?
Yeah, so, as you noted, we did lower our forecast a little bit from 17 storms to 16, for hurricanes from 9 to 8. And again, as you noted, that was primarily due to increased levels of Caribbean vertical wind shear. And that vertical wind shear has persisted pretty high through most of July, but there are indications that that wind shear should weaken potentially pretty substantially as we go into August. So right now it's pretty quiet out there. And probably the next couple of weeks, not a whole lot going on, but then indications are that as we get in more towards the middle part of August, that overall environmental conditions in the tropical Atlantic should become more conducive for storms, which is about when the season historically typically picks up. My mentor, Bill Gray, who founded the seasonal forecast at CSU, he used to ring a bell every year on August 20th, signaling the active part of the hurricane season. Because typically, you get most of your hurricane activity between mid-August and mid-October, even though the season is officially 6 months long.
Right, and that's such a great point to make, because you don't want folks to be lulled to sleep. But the averages tell us that there's still 93% of the season still to go. There's not some even distribution of storms in that 6 months, so it's something to be very aware of. Anything about this season, you may have just described it with some of the shear in the Caribbean, but is there anything that has surprised you so far, or that's behaving differently than what your outlook might have anticipated?
I think one of the things that we've seen over the last few weeks is that overall, the tropical Atlantic has actually warmed relative to normal fairly substantially. So about a month ago, the water temperatures in the tropical Atlantic were just a little bit warmer than normal in what we call the main development region, basically the primary region where hurricanes develop and intensify. The winds blowing across the tropical Atlantic have been pretty weak over the last few weeks. And when you have weak winds, you get less evaporation, less mixing off the ocean surface. And that tends to lead to warming. In the case from, say, June to July, the Atlantic is always going to warm, but it's warming at a faster rate. Also in the tropical Pacific, right now we have what we call neutral conditions, which means neither El Nino nor La Nina. But we've had pretty strong winds blowing across the central part of the tropical Pacific, and we've actually seen quite a bit of evaporation and cooling, and some fairly notable cooling in the Pacific. So overall, the sea surface temperatures, I would say, now look more conducive than, say, they did a month ago, with the Pacific a little bit cooler, the Atlantic a little bit warmer. But overall, again, the shear in the Caribbean has been quite persistent, and until that really starts to abate, the season's probably going to remain fairly quiet. As you know, we have had a few kind of really marginal storms in Andrea, Barry, and Chantal.
Yeah, and outside of Beryl in last season, which was a bizarro, weird storm, it was pretty quiet, and we saw what ended up happening with last season. Before we let you go, you had mentioned ringing the bell, getting into the second half of August as activity starts to ramp on up. As we move into peak season, is there an indicator or two that you look at and you say, oh boy, this is about to signal a shift? Is it the amount of dry air? Because you had said all things being even. Thank goodness for the dust and the dry air across the basin last couple of weeks, because there's been some pockets of favorable atmosphere.
Yeah, so typically kind of why the season really ramps up in the middle part of August is, as you noted, you tend to get less of that dust, less of that dry air off of Africa. Basically, kind of what gets your season going is that the waters get warm enough and you get enough moisture to really kind of help kind of have basically a juicy enough atmosphere to get the storms developing and intensifying. Late in the season, it's more the vertical wind shear, that change in wind speed and direction with height in the atmosphere, that tends to knock down the end of the season. So kind of that middle part of August is when generally what we call the thermodynamics, so basically the juiciness of the atmosphere, is such that you can really start to support these stronger storms.
Yeah, and we still got to get through all of it. 2/3 of all storms happening in August and September. So that is the message. Be vigilant as we're waiting on some of the things that you just described. That's Colorado State University's hurricane specialist, Dr. Phil Klotzbach. Always great to check in with you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.